everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. Ordinarily, I would want to talk about Yone and kind of give my first few impressions of the new champion right as he's coming out, but Riot did announce today their goals for the planned 2021 preseason item rework, and I really wanted to talk about that today because this item rework is liable to shake up the meta way more and way worse than Runes Reforged did last year. And I think we're still kind of recovering from all of the changes that Runes Reforged made last year. It really changed a lot of things. A lot of champions just became busted. Riot had to rework a lot of the keystones, a lot of the other smaller runes in each tree. That is still kind of an ongoing process, and things are still being balanced out. Even Nimbus Cloak got nerfed on last patch, as an example. And that's just runes. That's like a decision you make at the beginning of the game that's kind of done with, and you can play around with it, but not really too much. This is a much bigger change. Every champion uses items. Every champion uses multiple items. Every champion has alternate builds, has the ability to flex their build around different ways. And especially Riot said a while back that they wanted to stop changing items in order to just focus on balancing champions. So every champion is now balanced around the items that are available in the ecosystem. Well, the problem is if you change all the items, every single champion is going to be out of whack now, and we'll kind of talk more about how that's going to change things as we go through their plans. But suffice to say, this will be a massive, massive change for League of Legends. I cannot overstate that enough, and I really do think that this is going to be a big change going forward. So let's go ahead and talk generally about what Riot are saying are going to be their plans going forward. First and foremost, a few of their general goals are to changes to healing and grievous wounds, rework cooldown reduction, and improve tenacity. Now, healing and grievous wounds, basically they're saying that it's become so common that grievous wounds has gone from being an option meant for healing heavy games and more of just a standard pick. You just build grievous wounds, and I can't disagree with that. It does feel like Executioner's Calling or Morellonomicon or Thornmail is pretty much always a must-buy in every game. I don't think there's a single game I've played recently where that hasn't at least been a consideration. And it really does feel like, especially because of that, Lord Dominik's barely gets built, which means it's harder to chew through tanks, etc., etc. So Riot are attempting to weaken down healing on runes, items, and champions in general, and trying to make it so that Grievous Wounds is not always a necessity. So if your opponent's team is still Soraka, Dr. Mundo, Vladimir, okay, yeah, you probably still want your Executioner's Calling in that game, but ideally it's not a must-pick in games where, for example, you just have something like a Darius or something like a Yuumi, and you can kind of say, yeah, all right, I probably don't need Grievous Wounds. So I do like that. Riot are also attempting to buff up Grievous Wounds so that when you do need it, it's powerful enough to really make an impact. So I do like these changes. I've been saying for years now that kind of needed a rework, so I'm happy that Riot are finally getting around to it. CDR is being changed, and I'm not quite sure how I feel about this. Now, CDR is being reworked into a new stat called Ability Haste. Now, unlike CDR, Ability Haste is linear. So whereas CDR is 10%, or 20%, or percentage-wise, Ability Haste is going to be linear. So 10% CDR, for example, gives you 11% more casts. 40% CDR gives you 66% more casts, etc., etc. Meanwhile, Ability Haste is a linear power scaling model. So 10 Ability Haste gives you 10% more abilities cast. 20% gives you 20 Ability Haste gives you 20% more, etc. So that's a lot of weird numbers, but it does mean that Ability Haste generally won't spike as hard. The biggest problem with CDR right now is going from 10% to 20% is a big jump in how often you can cast your spells, whereas going from 10 Ability Haste to 20 Ability Haste won't be as big of a spike. Now, this has also meant that Riot are going to uncap Ability Haste and give champions the ability to sort of double down on Ability Haste builds in order to just cast as many spells as quickly as possible, rather than sort of get capped out on CDR and say, well, there's no reason for me to build this stat anymore. Now, on one hand, I do think it's a good idea with the linear scaling model instead of the exponential scaling model. I like that better. I think it makes more sense. On the other hand, Ability Haste is going to be a lot harder to grok than CDR. CDR, I can look at it and say, okay, well, my abilities are coming off cooldown 40% more quickly than they normally do, and that's a 10-second cooldown. That would put it down to 6 seconds. Okay, cool. That's easy enough to figure out. Meanwhile, 40 Ability Haste, I don't really know what that means. I know my spell's coming off cooldown more quickly, but I don't know exactly how fast, and it's harder to optimize a build on paper when it's harder to figure out exactly what ability haste is intended to mean. In the same vein that like lethality, for example, is not very obvious, whereas armor penetration makes complete sense. 35% armor penetration, okay, cool. So their armor is 35% worse versus 15 lethality. What does that mean? So I'm not a fan of that. I also think that there is a downside in being able to invest in it harder. I think that could lead to some theoretically Earth tier shenanigans. One can remember Brand, for example, being able to permanently stun champions with Seer. Now, I don't necessarily think that that sort of scenario can happen, but it is something where I could consider champions, especially with very high impact basic abilities like Veigar, being able to Rage Cage maybe 4 or 5 times in a team fight as opposed to once or twice, and that's huge. So I'm hesitantly optimistic about ability haste, but I do feel like this is going to be the one thing where there are going to be a lot of growing pains in the new item system. Tenacity, meanwhile, is just a straight change. Right now, Tenacity is going to be reducing the duration of knock-ups as well as other crowd control effects. It won't work on displacement, so knockback or pulls, because that's mostly about movement, not really the CC component. So I do like that. Now, some abilities are going to be changed because reducing their duration undermines the functionality. So like Vi R, if you can get out of that knock-up faster than normal, then Vi just feels bad for ever pressing R. So some abilities are going to be knock-ups plus suppressions. I'm hoping there aren't too many of those, because otherwise it completely removes the ability for Tenacity to reduce the effectiveness of knockups. But I do like the fact that they are cognizant of the fact that some abilities will just straight be suboptimal if you can reduce the duration of the knockup. So I don't like how many more suppressions are going to be in the game, but I do like that Tenacity is going to affect knockups in general. Last of the general changes, jungle items are going to be getting changed, and Riot are making them a lot more like support itemizations. They're going to be a starting item that require no additional investment. So basically, as you farm the jungle, your jungle item upgrades itself and gives you sort of the stat line that you want to get out of this item without you having to spend more gold on it. So you buy your jungle item to start with, and you immediately start building your first item. Again, on one hand, I do like this because I think that the new support items are really nice. You just get to start building your first item, which feels great. But I feel like this model makes it harder to customize your build, which is something I really liked about the jungle. Your ability to say, I want Blue Smite this game, I want Red Smite this game, I'd like to go Cinder Hulk this game because I'm behind, I'm going to go Warrior this game because I'm ahead, I'm going to go Blood Razor this game because I'm really ahead. That sort of a thing doesn't sound like it's going to be an option in the new system, which I'm not as big a fan of. I do like the early investment, but again, I'm sort of two minds about this. Again, though, these are only just sort of their directions and not concrete examples, so there is possibility for Riot to still fit in the ability to customize your build like Cinder Hulk, Warrior, Runic Echoes, what have you. Those should still be options, so I'm hoping they can keep that in the game. Finally, talking on a class-by-class basis, as almost every champion class is receiving some updates to their itemization. First and foremost, marksman items are being updated, and I am not a fan of what Riot are trying to do. Now, they do have some advantages here with their directions. I think that they are trying to remove the too many must-buy items from a marksman's build. So they're trying to make it so marksmen have more flexibility in their build paths to be able to make decisions based on the game, instead of saying, well, I have to have Infinity Edge, and then I have to have a Zeal item, and then I have to make it a little bit easier for them to say, wow, that assassin's really big. Let me get an AD armor item to keep myself alive longer. And on top of that, trying to fix the agency changes of marksman by saying, hey, you can sacrifice some of your DPS by buying to buy an item that will keep you alive a little bit longer. Now, these items are going to reduce your overall DPS, which means I feel like they're not going to get bought at all, because players just hate sacrificing damage for survivability. Every game, I never see marksmen alter their builds in any meaningful way to say, hey, that assassin's ahead, maybe I should go Tabby this game. They pretty much always go Berserker's Greaves. So I do think these options will be underutilized, but I also think that, especially in the pro arena, these will be good changes. The problem I have is that Riot are saying they want marksmen to spike with one item again. And every time they have done this, marksmen have become the best champion on any given team, period, once they finish their first item for the rest of the game. And that is always a problem to me, because the game ceases to become about, well, hey, maybe it's worth it to camp my top laner this game. Hey, maybe it's worth it to camp my mid laner this game. Maybe it's worth it to play around these other roles. And it just becomes, oh, did our Jhin hit his Infinity Edge power spike? Okay, he's the best champion on the team. All resources go to him. I really dislike it when Riot does this. I'm hoping they find a way to make it so that it's not that overbearing. But I am not optimistic because, like I said, every time they've done it before where marksman can spike with an item or even an item and a half, their champion, the marksman just becomes the best champion in the game. So I'm hoping that doesn't happen, but the recency does not speak very kindly of that particular preference. Moving on to mages. Riot are hoping to get better first item choices for mages because the rest of mage itemization they feel is very good. They have a lot of options that they can pick up depending on what actives or passes they would like to have. But their first item is pretty much always a guarantee based on whatever the meta is, whatever the current environment looks like. Now, I do get this from a certain extent for Riot, but mages have almost always had a must-buy item. I can even think of back in Season 2, Season 3, where there was an argument between Athene's and Holy Grail versus Morellonomicon, but it was still pretty much a solved choice. It was Athene's if you were into a mage and Morellonomicon otherwise. And then they tried to do a rework where they said, okay, Athene's, you're a support item now. You're going to take Morellonomicon if you want regeneration. And then we're also going to buff up Tyr and Rod to maybe compete as your first item choice. Everyone just bought Morellos. Then to the most recent rework where pretty much everyone just buys Ludens or GLP or whatever the most popular one currently is. So I do like that they're going to attempt it again. But at this point, it does feel like you're slightly beating a dead horse. And I already talked about ability haste. There is potential for abuse there, but we'll kind of see how that works out. AP Fighter and Assassin itemizations, they're getting their own items, which is really nice because they've just been borrowing from everybody else for the longest period of time. So I do like the fact that they're going to be getting some of their own options. AD Fighter items are also getting some changes. Riot are trying to give them tailored defensive options instead of one-size-fits-all defense like Steric's Gauge or Death Stance. I do like this because I dislike how must-buy a Death Stance or a Steric's Gauge before it were, and I like the ability to maybe say, hey, I need a Maw this game, or hey, I need a physical damage durability item this game. I like that potential choice. Riot also did talk about core item diversity, though, which I don't think is in as bad of a spot as they give it. I do feel like the Black Cleaver versus Trinity Force versus Hydra item dichotomy was interesting, and I felt like there was enough decision-making for me, but maybe that's not the case for everybody else. So Riot are trying to sharpen the current options and give new options so fighters have a lot more choice in what they want to build first, rather than saying, well, it's Tiamat Cleaver every game, or it's going to be Trinity Force first every game, or what have you. 80 Assassins are also getting some changes. Now, Riot say that Assassins had to fill their late game build by pulling from other classes, which makes them suboptimal. I disagree that they were suboptimal buys. I think them being able to poach 80 carry and 80 fighter items just made them flexible rather than having to itemize poorly. But they will be getting some late game assassin build or assassin items for them, so it could be interesting. I do think that their item builds right now are a little... It's sort of just a question of what order you want to build things in rather than what items you build. So having more options for 80 Assassins won't necessarily be a bad thing, and they will, of course, still be able to poach from other classes if needed. Tank itemization, meanwhile, I'm a big fan of these changes. Riot are trying to give tanks, first of all, better magic resistance options, which I love because the current options really leave a lot to be desired and don't let you itemize against different kinds of magic damage that you want to be able to deal with. There is a possibility that Force of Nature comes back, especially given that Riot are talking about giving late game capstone items to tanks. So the item you can kind of build in the late stages of the game that really ties your whole build together. That is going to be a big deal for tanks. It's going to make them feel much better to play, especially in the later stages of the game. I really can't wait to see these changes, especially if Fawn does come back, because that item was great. Riot also want to talk about or enhance tank utility and give them more options to adapt to a team's strategy. So allowing tanks to say, hey, we're playing Protect the Cog, so I need to make sure I can keep him safe. Or we really need a split pusher in this game. I'm a tank, but I can build a split pushing item and let me do that. There's a potential that Zrot Portal comes back in some shape or form, so we'll see. But I am a big fan of their plans going forwards for tank itemization. Finally, enchanters are getting some changes here. On one hand, I like that Riot are trying to tone back the active overload that enchanters really have, because they have a ton of items that they have to activate in the middle of fights to be efficient. On the other hand, though, I do feel like supports have precious little to do in team fights besides just keeping carries safe. So I don't know that I agree with the fact that they have no good options or that they have so many actives that they have to worry about. I really do think that they can just kind of go for it and build all those items. So I think it'll be good at the end of the day, but I don't know that I necessarily agree with. But Riot also want to make sure that their items have more build variety and more clear strengths. So you can say specifically, I want to build better healing, I want to build better defense, I want to build better mana regen. Those are better options you can pick as opposed to just kind of getting every stat lumped in together. That's going to be it. I will have their full post linked in the comment section below, or sorry, in the description, so you guys will be able to check that out on your own and read exactly what Riot are planning on doing. But in general, I'm hesitantly optimistic about the 2021 champion class item changes. I think there's going to be a lot that will kind of change how this game is played, and a lot that's going to make it very interesting going into 2021. Naturally, this means that some things are going to be completely broken, but hopefully Riot are able to take steps to make it so that things don't break the game in half. Let me know what changes you're most excited for down in the comment section below. Would love to hear your thoughts, and thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed the video today, go ahead and leave a like, and if you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it, and I'll talk to you all later.